this point. This process started back on May 5th when Chief Carmichael gave his notice to the town that he was leaving Walpole for Newton. Once we received this notice, the Select Board decided to conduct a thorough search process. The board authorized the hiring of Community Paradigm Associates to oversee the advertisement and recruitment for the position of police chief and assist the town with navigating through the interview process. In addition to hiring Bernie Lynch and his team at Community Paradigm Associates, the board also authorized me to hire public safety consultants to conduct an assessment center of the top candidates for the position. Once Bernie and his team were brought on board, he worked with the town to develop a position statement to attract candidates to Walpole and advertise the position in a variety of locations over the summer. Bernie conducted multiple outreach sessions with current and former town officials, board members, residents, and on September 8th, he conducted a community forum at the Council on Aging to solicit input from Walpole residents. In September, the Select Board authorized the makeup of a screening committee that consisted of resident Jim Brady, resident Phil Mackey, resident Audrey Grace, resident Megan Rees-Ahigian, resident Paul Millett, school superintendent Dr. Bridget Goff, Fire Chief Tim Bailey, DPW Director Rick Matson, Finance Director Jody Cuneo, Board of Health Director Melissa Ranieri, and myself. The screening committee initially reviewed the applications and narrowed the list down to a few individuals for interviews. The committee probed specific areas such as management and leadership style, community relations, community policing, diversity, equity, and inclusion, personnel management, financial management, and the police service delivery. Once interviews were completed, the list was narrowed further down and multiple candidates were passed on to the assessment center. Wayne Sampson of Public Safety Consultants brought in other current Massachusetts police chiefs to assist him in conducting the assessment center. The center lasted all day long and each candidate was ranked. Tonight, you will meet and interview the top 2 candidates for the position. With that, I'll hand it off to Bernie for a few additional comments.
Well, I think that Jim, I think, did a good job sort of outlining the process that we used, but I just wanted to stress a few of the points that I think were particularly notable. It has been a very comprehensive process that the town has used, and we've been pleased to be part of this process. As Jim indicated, when we were brought on, we made an immediate effort to reach out to members of the board, as well as the police department, key department heads here in the town, community leaders that were referred to us by members of the board. As Jim said, we held a community forum to get feedback from residents that were interested in providing us with input as to what the town should be looking for in choosing an ex-police chief. We also received a number of emails. We did an email solicitation, we solicited email responses for people who were unable to be at the forum. We did create a position profile that I believe you all saw and was distributed widely throughout the police world. That profile outlined information about the town, about the department, the local government, the challenges and opportunities facing Walpole, as well as a description of the ideal candidate based upon the feedback that we received. We use that as an important process for the town to consider what they're looking for, as well as providing it to the potential candidates so that they know that they will be a fit. And then we use it again along with the screening committee to identify whether people match up to that ideal candidate. As Jim said, we advertised extensively. We used the Massachusetts Municipal Association, the International Association of Chiefs of Police, the Mass Chiefs Association, the National Organization of Black Law Executives, the Hispanic American Police Command Officers Association, and the National Association of Women in Law Enforcement Executives. And then we did extensive outreach to our own database of candidates that we know of that are looking to move into chief positions here in the Commonwealth. As Jim said, we had 33 candidates, representation from across the country. Very impressive group of candidates that we had. We were able to narrow it down to about half that really met the criteria that you were looking for as a board. Handed all of those off to the screening committee. And the screening committee then narrowed that down further to the 7 candidates that were interviewed over the span of a couple of days. Based upon that, I believe that they identified 5 that would be moved on to the assessment center. 1 withdrew during that process. And then, of course, you went through the assessment center, and then ultimately the 2 that are here tonight are those that were identified. They had full support of the screening committee, and they were the top 2 scorers in the assessment center. I was very pleased as your consultants to help work through this. I was very pleased with the process, very pleased with the screening committee that you put in place, and I think the candidates that you have before you were outstanding, as were the others. Were very good candidates, but these 2 in particular really stand out. So I'm happy to be here tonight, and my understanding is that I will help facilitate the discussion for you. It's intended really for you, give you an opportunity to sit back, listen to the candidates, and dig into the probes and the follow-up questions that you feel are important for you to make your decision in appointing this next police chief. So happy to take any questions or at this point regarding the process.
Anybody have any questions, Jim?
So when you and I chatted way back in the beginning, one of the things that I had mentioned to you that I wanted to make sure we saw was the diverse slate of candidates. Can you talk about the diversity profile of the 33 and give us a sense for how well you were able to accomplish that?
We were able to, we had 1 woman that applied out of the 33. In terms of identifying people of color that were in the remaining group, it's difficult to say. Nothing jumped out to us that they were, but we did make, as I indicated with the advertising and the posting that we did, extensive efforts to get that diverse pool. But we can't ask people, like their ethnicity and race, but I think we did a very good job of casting the net for you.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions or comments for Bernie? So just, I want to make one process issue I want to put on the table. We did post this meeting so that we could have discussion and a vote tonight, but my intention is not to have a vote tonight unless everyone wanted to have a vote. I have heard from a couple people that they wanted a little bit of time to think about it after today, and we will put it on the agenda next week. So I just want to let you know that when we're done, I will ask that question, do we want to consider having a vote tonight? And unless everyone wants to go that direction, we'll have that be next Tuesday. So, okay.
Okay, I will go get you your first candidate.
Should be able to use those. Yeah, of course, yeah. We're gonna figure it out. I know.
Jim,
Yeah,
there's a plug hanging right there.
I saw that, but I don't think that's the.
I could introduce you to Leon Karlikowski.
Welcome.
Thank you, good evening. I do shake hands, but we're in a different time, so.
Nice to meet you.
Mr. Chair, I'll let you do your introductions.
Yeah, so let's just go around the room, we'll introduce ourselves, and then you can introduce yourselves.
Of course.
And then Bernie is going to sort of start off with some questions.
Of course.
And what will happen is if anybody on the board, if that question spawns a follow-up question, we'll just deal with follow-up questions right away, so. Glenn?
My name's Glenn Maffey. I'm a select board member, lifelong resident, and a business owner in town.
Pleasure.
Nice to meet you.
Hi, my name's Ben Barrett, and obviously I'm a select board member as well.
Mark Gallivan.
Nancy McKenzie.
I am Jim O'Neill. Congratulations on being one of our finalists.
Thank you.
Appreciate you being here tonight.
You're very kind.
Leon, we've talked before, Jim Johnson, Town
Yes.
Administrator.
Pleasure again.
Yes.
I'm the executive assistant to the board and the township too.
Excellent.
Nice to meet you.
So Bernie, I'll turn it over to you to get us going.
Okay, great, thank you. Well, Leon, again, thank you for being here and going through this, this process. I know these processes can be long and involve a number of steps, and we appreciate you sticking with us through this. You know, why don't we start with introducing yourself, and specifically, you know, obviously the board has seen your resume, they know your background, but maybe just give a brief overview of.
Focused, and so I decided to join the Marines, and so I went to the Marines and served about 8 years active duty mix with reserves, and ended up deploying during the first Gulf War, and that was quite an interesting experience, kind of the first instance of me learning what leadership is and leading from the front and doing things, and kind of inspired me into policing. And so then I joined the New Canaan Police Department. I was 21, and it was the first department I applied to. Didn't know New Canaan, didn't live near there. I grew up in Bridgeport and Stratford, which is bigger cities. And so been there ever since, and I've been lucky. I came up through the ranks. I was a patrol officer, I was a dispatcher, I was a field training officer, I was a member of our SWAT team. Ultimately got promoted to sergeant. I was a sergeant for about 4 years in patrol, and I was the executive officer of our SWAT team, and almost was scuba qualified. And then I was promoted to lieutenant, and I was a shift commander as a lieutenant for several years in the patrol division, and ultimately became the commander of our SWAT team. And over the years I was serving in the SWAT team, we handled a number of critical incidents and really intense training and interesting experiences for the time. Subsequently, I was promoted to captain, and I relinquished command of the special response team because of responsibilities in that position. And my first stint as a captain, I was in charge of internal affairs, records, recruitment testing and selection, and all kind of all administrative support functions, department vehicles, et cetera, equipment, all that stuff. Did that for several years, and then I was moved into the operations division as a captain, and I was in charge of the patrol division and the detective division, and all those related responsibilities. Ultimately, when I was a captain for about 7 years, and our chief at the time decided to retire, and they put out an announcement, and I competed nationally for the position, comparable to what this process was like. And ultimately, I did get the position, and so I was interim chief for several months until they decided, and then I've been the chief for about 8 years and done a lot of great things, a lot of interesting things, and I'm really happy with the state of the department's in right now. And you know, I think that's kind of why, segueing into why I chose Walpole. It's very comparable to the community that I live in and work in. A little bit different, Walpole, but not so different that it doesn't make me uncomfortable. And that's kind of why I picked Walpole, and I've been pretty selective about where I decided to go. And a couple of years ago, I could have retired and done something different. I'm an attorney too, and so going back a little bit, I only had about a year and a half of college, and I decided it was important for me to go back to school. So I went back to school, and I got a bachelor's degree. Then I went to law school. I got a law degree. And I went to and got an MBA also. And what's not on my resume is I started work towards a PhD, but I had to abandon that because of commitments and cost. So that's a future goal of mine, maybe one day. And so interrelated to that, I've been pretty selective about what I decided to do and where I want to move to. And I had some conversations with my family early on, and I could have just completely retired and became an attorney full time, but that's not something I wanted to do. And especially the times we're in, I think we need strong leaders to continue to stay in policing. And we're seeing a lot of people leaving policing early when they shouldn't be, and there's going to be a real issue, I think, in the years to come, potentially, not just leadership, but people that want to be policemen, that should be policemen, aren't going to get into the profession. And we're starting to see a kind of a shortage in that regard. The candidates are different than they used to be 10 years ago, 15 years ago, and that's not necessarily a good thing, but I think that's why we need really strong leaders to continue in policing. And that's why I decided I want to do this a while longer. I really, most days, like everybody, sometimes you have tough days at work, but most days I enjoy work, and I enjoy being a policeman. And I go out there, sometimes I'll stop cars, I'll get involved in things, just because that's what I love to do. And what I really love to do, and why I decided originally why I wanted to get promoted and advance to the ranks, is you can all appreciate you've worked in whatever industries from X number of years, and you hear people complain about things, and why aren't things getting better, why aren't things changing, why is so-and-so doing this? And I said, I'm going to be part of the solution rather than the problem. That's why I want to get promoted, I want to advance my education, and I want to move up in the department to make things better for everybody. And, you know, in a lot of different ways, and I think our profession is evolving, which is likely a good thing for a lot of different reasons. And, you know, we've evolved to the change, I think, really well. We were one of the first agencies in our county to have body cameras, enormously helpful tool, and for a lot of different reasons. We're one of only 3 nationally accredited agencies in our county, and there's about 17 agencies in the county, so that's a measure that few agencies in Connecticut and frankly Massachusetts don't achieve. And that's certainly a goal, I think, for every agency to achieve that, because it's about 400 different standards that you have to adhere to, and it makes you a really pretty exceptional agency, and makes you do things you wouldn't normally do. And then, you know, behavioral health is a big deal. You know, I initiated a behavioral health director in our town, which is the first in Connecticut, if not the tri-state area, to have a director of behavioral health because of the emerging issues we were seeing with mental health. And I see really a couple different things, usually with most incidents, policing-wise. Usually there's some substance use component, and sometimes there's a psychological or a mental component that we need to address. So that's why we had 2 focus areas. I think like most communities, we saw a lot of overdoses in a certain period of time, and we addressed that by deploying Narcan and better training our people. And then the behavioral health component is kind of focused on that too, because it's all interrelated. And I think that's the real need and the real opportunities I see here. There's opportunities, you have a lot of behavioral health calls. I think there's an opportunity to look at it differently. A lot of communities are looking at, do we need to send the police to these calls? Can we send a social worker or a counselor to the call if there's no violence involved? Does that make sense? Maybe it does. But I think what I really get excited about is looking to do things differently than we've been doing them, and better, in a better way. And you do that by engaging the department, engaging the community, and figuring out what makes sense. And part of that, I actually put together, along with help from a lot of different members of my department, a 5-year strategic plan that kind of moves us forward and shows us where we're going and what we're trying to do. And that was perfectly aligned with what the community needs. And I think that's a real important component I'd like to see in Walpole too, is a strategic plan of some sort. So that gives everybody some direction about what they intend to do. And you know, overall, I can't be any more pleased with the way my career has gone, and I just want to continue it in a great community like Walpole.
Let me ask you a first question.
Sure.
You've talked about why Walpole would be a good fit for you, but what makes you want to leave New Canaan?
Because I can retire, and it's kind of it's a funny phrase I'll borrow from someone pretty smart that I knew, and they said, you know, people are like plants. Sometimes you have to repot them to get them to grow. So it's kind of time to repot and start to grow in a different direction. And that's kind of why, you know, and I truly do love policing despite all its challenges. And so that's why I'm going into policing, whether that's here or somewhere else. And that's why I'm pursuing it here. And it just seems to be a good alignment here for a lot of different reasons.
Okay, thanks.
You spoke of the importance of leadership.
Yes.
As chief. Talk to us about your leadership style. How do you interact with the members of your department now? And how would you spoke about the change, the opportunity for making changes. How would you advance change if you were made the chief of the Walpole Police Department?
Sure. I'd say I'm a situational leader. It depends on the circumstance. You know, usually democratic, so you can get participative comments from people and decide what course of action you're going to go in. But sometimes it has to be an autocratic kind of leadership where you make a decision and that's it. But most of the time, you know, unless it's an emergency situation, I like to be democratic and like to get people's thoughts and kind of meld. And I think, you know, going into change management, that's a really complex area, and it's very hard sometimes to manage change, and especially in policing. Because the reality is, you know, most policemen are type A. They don't like being told what to do. They don't like being directed in a certain way. So you have to be thoughtful about how you enact change. And I think the best way to do that, frankly, as a leader is to suggest ideas to people and empower them and let them run with those ideas. And they may not know that it's your goal, but that usually creates an ownership concept. And I've seen that work really well over the years, just by kind of creating that energy. And, you know, perfect example is when we formed a steering committee, which created a strategic plan. And the steering committee had some very inexperienced officers that were brand new, that had a lot of great ideas. And I think that was very empowering for some people, and we enacted a number of those ideas, which have been very successful. So change management is something I'm always learning about, and it's never an easy thing, and you have to be careful. I think you have to listen a lot, you have to figure things out, and I have a million ideas, but that doesn't mean you push your ideas on people. It's better to get cooperation and buy-in first, and then gradually move towards the right direction with achieving those goals. Because otherwise you're going to fail, and I've seen failures, and for lots of different reasons, by not being thoughtful about how you're enacting change, and then you get resistance and then the resulting problems from that. So it's no easy thing to change. I think there's two things that people always say. It's they hate when things don't change, and they hate when things do change. So if there's somewhere in the middle, there's a balance.
Yeah, if I could just ask a quick
jump
question.
in.
So you talk about your leadership style. Your department now
Sure.
clearly understands who you are and that you're a situational leader, that you welcome their feedback.
Sure.
How would you take that leadership style and introduce it to a new department that doesn't know who you are and might be questioning you from day one? How does that process unfold? 1 week, 1 month, or like what does the first week look like, the first quarter and
Sure.
beyond?
It's a good question. Yeah, it's a challenge certainly coming in from the outside, and you have to gradually build trust with everybody. And I think it's a lot of listening, and it can take months unless you see something that's immediately needs to be fixed. That's a real out of the ordinary, not a best practice. That's going to cause harm to the department or to the town. Otherwise, you can gradually enact that change and gradually build confidence and build support and move in that direction. And I think most people want to be heard, and they want you to listen to them, and they want to be heard. And I think when you empower people with an idea that maybe you adjust their idea a little bit, but usually people take ownership of that and they're going to run with it. And I think your original question is it takes a little bit of time to build that trust and confidence, and everybody figuring out who you are, and everybody's worried. I think when a new leader comes in, that their situation is going to change dramatically, not for the better. But usually you can put that to side, and in fact, when I first took over as chief, even though I was from inside, I met with everybody in the department individually and said, what are we doing well? What aren't we doing well? What needs to change? And how can I help you? And here's how you can help me. And those were kind of introductory questions that kind of helped me build up over the years to the point where, we're at where we're at today. So it's a gradual process.
Interesting. So you meet with each individual member of the department.
Sure.
And that's the way to develop an individual relationship. And then there are probably factions or groups of leadership within the department. So do you also take it from that individual meeting to group meetings beyond that?
Absolutely. Yeah, I think, as we all know, you have a different conversation with people individually versus a group. So the individual meeting is really important because people will tell you things they won't in a group setting. Mm-hmm. So the group settings are important for cohesiveness. So I think that's important. And I'll do ride-alongs. That's a really important thing. I'll show up on calls and monitor and see how things are going, just to kind of build that familiarity with everybody. And certainly staff meetings are an important thing to build on. Like I said, I think there's a real opportunity to create a strategic plan. I know you've done internal and external surveys. I think the last external one was 2020, and I'm not sure if it referenced an internal survey. But doing internal surveys is very important too, because employees will disclose or say things anonymously that they wouldn't in person. So you just put all those little pieces of the puzzle together, and then you can figure out what direction you're going to move in and how you're going to move forward. But it needs to be a really thoughtful process.
That makes sense.
Good. How large a department is it?
We have 47 sworn and around 6 civilian employees.
Okay. In your strategic plan, obviously, there must be a vision in there, a mission statement?
Yes.
What would be your vision? What is your vision of a police department?
If you haven't read the 21st Century Policing Model, that really, I think, is something we actually came upon when we were starting to work on the strategic plan, and we realized that it was kind of aligned with what we do. One of the components in that plan is building trust and confidence. That's an important thing for any police department. Another one's technology, social media. I think there's opportunities here to embrace social media a little bit more than they're being embraced for both communications with the community and for recruiting and getting information out, because virtually everybody now is communicating or we're getting information on social media. So that's really an important model to do. And there's really 3 components, I think, to great police departments, and that's policies, And you'll have that. I know you're working on, Walpole PD is working on Massachusetts accreditation. I'm not sure where they are at with that. So you need strong policies that are best practices. And then you need oversight. So that's important to have strong command staff and strong supervisors that are overseeing things and monitoring things. So when things don't look right, they get intervened and corrected right away. And then the other part is training, which is something some communities fall on, and they don't do well in training. Because the reality is if you can teach an officer how to do something well and they do something 100 times, I don't know if you've ever heard of the 10,000 hour rule. That's a rule that says pretty much the closer you get to 10,000 hours in doing anything, the more of an expert you're going to become. So I think if the closer you get to doing something, critical incident-wise, whether that's a psychiatric call, whether that's a use of force incident, and the closer you get officers to that 10,000 hour rule, the more likely they're going to make the right decisions. And I typically study and look at things across the country when things go badly. And there's three components usually that aren't there in that department, and that's policies, training, and oversight. So those are kind of a snapshot of where I think things could go.
Okay. In terms of, I think it was a great question regarding relationships within the department. How would you go about, you'd be also walking into a different community?
Yes.
How would you develop relationships with the Walpole citizens, and how would you promote the transparency of the department that I think you've spoken of and that?
Of course. I think a critical thing which hasn't been implemented is a body camera program. I think that's really important. And that just promotes transparency, and the reality is it protects the officers from complaints that aren't based, and that's really important too. But I think doing the outreach in the community is a really important thing. I know you do a lot of outreach here, the police department does, which is a great thing. We've done some pretty popular things. I haven't seen that you've done a civilian police academy. That's a really important thing that we've done over the years a number of times. Where you invite the citizens in, you teach them about the department, about how you do things, and that's really kind of a learning experience. And you make mini police officers to some degree out in the community, and that builds that trust, and it's a really important thing. I've done things like pizza with the chief, Chipotle with the chief. You just invite any communitors who want to come in, you talk to them, you have a meal, open conversation, no real agenda or anything, just building that rapport. And I know, I happen to be a VFW, Veteran to Foreign War member, and I would certainly join the local post there. That's another way to build connections. The schools are another important component, critical, to meet with the superintendent, to understand how the schools are working, understand the relationships. I know you have school resource officers, and that's an important thing, and we do too, and we actually enhance that by we have liaison officers that are liaison at every school, because we don't have officers at every school. But we have liaisons at the elementary school. So the principal has an officer that they can go to that stops by periodically when they're working, that they can connect with, and that builds a familiarity with the community that's really important. And it's a lot of work, and it needs to be constant effort. And if you lose the trust of the community, it's really hard to build it back. It seems like the community trusts the Walpole Police Department, from what I've read. So that's a great thing, but it can only be built upon. And I think I'm ready to do that.
Does that for you represent what you've just described? I mean, I was driving at a question of community relations, but, there's the concept, it's perhaps an overused term now of community policing. How, many communities look at community policing as they set up a division of community policing. How do you look at community policing?
It has to be a philosophy, I think, from the top down to some degree. For example, we make around 5,000 motor vehicle stops a year, but only a third of those result in tickets, because officers can just warn people and have a conversation and change that behavior. So that's a really important component there. Balanced. And one thing I love, we have a police commission, which is appointed. It's a state statute, and they're civilians that oversee me and the department. They don't really have operational control, but they have general overall authority. And we have meetings every month, and one of my favorite things at the meeting is reading the letters of commendation or thanks that the officers get regularly. And for years, we weren't really doing that, and that was a mistake. And that's a really important thing too. When when you have officers getting letters and you're not publicizing it and pushing it out to the press and letting the community know, that's a real deficit, and that needs to happen. Because that just builds that connection with the community when they see, I'm lucky to have a very good relationship with our local press, and they do a lot of really nice articles about our officers when we do award ceremonies, when we do the monthly meetings and we present their letters of thanks and commendations and things like that. So that's a real nice connection that you can build. And despite what some people say, everybody needs a pat on the back every once in a while. You come to work every day and it's nice for somebody to thank you. And when you're publicly recognized for that, that's even more powerful.
Okay. Getting into sort of, there's the big picture of policing that we've talked about with the relationships and leadership. There's also the more nuts and bolts, I guess I'll call them for now, aspects of, you're responsible for the management of the personnel within the department. As much as empowering them, the employees of the department, the members of the department, how do you manage people to hold them accountable to certain performance standards or responsibilities, and how do you how have you handled the necessity of discipline from time to time, and what would that look like?
Sure. So typically, we do annual goals and objectives.
For each employee?
Well, it's overall department
Okay.
goals and objectives,
So, okay.
and those filter down to each employee. We have an evaluation system, so those get filtered into the evaluation system. And then we have something that's a component called the Performance Development Plan, which incorporates the individual employees' goals and should incorporate the department's goals. And about training, about what are they looking for career-wise in the future to kind of build their career pattern there. So that's a real important component to making sure that everybody understands the direction and what their obligations are. But then that goes down to the first line supervisor, which is typically a sergeant. Sergeant evaluates the officers, lieutenant evaluates the sergeant, et cetera, going up through the chain. So it's really important to have that cohesiveness and everybody understand what the expectations are. So that's a really important component. And, discipline is a necessary thing sometimes. And, typically, although I have an open door policy and, I'll engage with people, I also want them to follow the chain of command, because the police department is a paramilitary organization. So it's important for officers to go to their immediate supervisor with an issue, try to get it corrected. And if that doesn't work, that's fine if they go up through the chain. But when people are going directly and jumping supervisors, it doesn't help anyone to do that. And sometimes you need to correct that and redirect that person to go back to their immediate supervisor, and then monitor it and make sure that it's fixed. So, discipline, I've seen all kinds of things happen over the years, just like any department, discipline-wise, and, you hate to do it, but sometimes it's severe enough behavior that you have to take really corrective action. And the idea is, I think learning from that is, what's the amount of discipline that is absolutely necessary to change the behavior going forward? Because it can be a very punitive thing, and I've seen some places operate like that, where it's a very punitive discipline system and there's a lot of discontent, and that's not necessarily a good thing. Ideally, just like the public, you'd like officers and employees to correct themselves when something happens, take responsibility for it. We all make mistakes. I make mistakes just like everybody else does. You take ownership of it and you move on and don't repeat it, and those are important things. And if you can communicate that to the employee when something does happen, perfect example is when I first took over, we would see anywhere from 14 to 18 grievances a year. Now we see maybe one or two. Better communication, better expectations from everybody, understanding what the process should be and what it's used for. And for example, if someone makes a decision that's contrary to the labor agreement or the contract, and it's the department's fault for doing that, then it's going to get corrected. But if it's simply someone trying to interpret the contract language in a way they shouldn't and trying to gain something from that, then that's something that you can't entertain and that needs to go up through and get defended against.
Okay.
So I'd like to dig in a little bit more on holding people accountable, and specifically in the area of standards, policies and practices, laws, rules and regs and so forth. What's your view on how the department needs to function within all those things?
Sure. Like I said, I think that's one of the three legs of a really great police department is that policy component. So that's why it's important for your department to get accredited. You know, maybe Massachusetts is good. CALEA, in my opinion, is better. This is a national standard, and you know you're gonna have best practices there, and you know your standards are gonna be the most updated they're ever gonna be. And that's a really important component of that. So, you know, every department has manual conduct and discipline, rules and regulations to make sure that everybody's following them. And you know, there's gotta be a reasonableness to it all too, you know, you have to communicate with people and understand why they didn't do something, and sometimes there's a reasonable explanation about why they didn't. And that's smarter to do it that way than just be punitive with people. So has to be a fine balance of that. Certainly, you know, we're a paramilitary police organization. There's rules and regulations for good reason to make sure that there's order and discipline in the department and things are being run well. But you also don't want to overreach that and create a department that is too militaristic, if you will. You're probably familiar with the term warrior. There's a you know, the police profession, like many professions, goes from different philosophies. For a number of years, there was a warrior philosophy. The whole SWAT team concept, the whole, you know, we're going to go out there and get the bad guy. Now we're seeing policing, for good reason, go back to a guardian mindset, where we're guardians. We're there to help people. We're there to guide them along, and we're there to correct behavior when we need to, for various good reasons. So that's a similar concept internally. You know, if I can have a conversation with someone, and I know that I'm going to correct their behavior going forward, as long as it's not a substantial deviation, then that's a win for me. And I've seen that happen over the years, and I've seen people grow and learn. And you know, human beings make mistakes, and but sometimes, like I said, you know, if you watch these incidents that happen across the country, typically not around in our area, but things that go really badly and are handled horribly and are criminal in nature, then usually you'll see some kind of deficiency with policies, training, or oversight. And that's a very typical thing. Someone wasn't paying attention and doing what they should have done. If Officer X has 17 disciplinary files against him for excessive use of force, and then it results in a death of someone unjustified, someone wasn't paying attention and doing their job. So that's that whole oversight concept that's really important.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
You had started to talk a little bit about my next topic, I guess, within this personnel management, and that's the administration of a collective bargaining agreement in terms of the grievance procedures and how that you carry that out. What's been your experience in New Canaan with the actual negotiation of an agreement? What's been your role, and how do you see that? How would you like to see your role in that process?
Yeah, I've negotiated several contracts over the years. In fact, we just completed one. It's a tentative agreement, but it's not voted on yet. And so I'm one of several town side people that participate in that negotiation. And it can be difficult, frankly, with union members, because positions are different, and you try to do some things that you believe are in the best fiscal interests of the town, but it might be contrary to what the union believes. So it can be a difficult negotiation there. But you know, I think it's important for the chief to be at the table, because there's certain nuances of negotiating things related to the labor agreement that someone who's not familiar with it wouldn't know. So that's a really important thing. You know, I read your labor agreements, very comparable to many across the country as far as grievances and all that. So you know, and I'm pretty good analyzing labor agreements and looking at future issues that could be negotiated. And obviously, you know, sometimes you have to have a compromise because you don't want people to be absolutely unhappy because you're trying to negotiate a point that you believe is right. So sometimes you have to compromise, and you know, in the middle somewhere is reasonable. So it's never an easy thing to negotiate a contract. I've seen some go out negotiated really quickly and everybody happy. I've seen some difficult ones that went to arbitration, which is not fun. It's usually no one wins when you go to arbitration to some degree, but sometimes you have to, depending on the issues.
In terms of staffing, another aspect of personnel management, what do you look for in officers when you're hiring? And what actions have you taken to work to diversify the New Canaan Police Department?
Sure, that's a good question. It's a really important concept, and we've been really fortunate through a lot of hard work of my people, less. Obviously, I happen to be in the position of leading the department, but my people really do all the work, and that's like any department. And I'm very fortunate to have a very diverse department. We're about a quarter diverse, Hispanic, African American, and female. Most females in history, most Hispanics in history, and most African Americans in history. So that's a great thing. We're able to do that and bring in good people. And it's a balance to some degree of there's been certain periods of time where we've been brought in lateral officers from other departments in Connecticut or other states, and that's been a win-win for us in a lot of ways. And then bringing in entry-level people, typically what I look for is ideally some kind of life experience to show that they've been in some kind of crisis and they're able to handle crisis situations even though they aren't trained in it in a lot of ways. Integrity and empathy, and typically we have our selection process in Connecticut is much different than Massachusetts. We have a polygraph that an officer has to go through, which is very comprehensive and often difficult and challenging in a lot of ways, and a very comprehensive background investigation, and just like Massachusetts, but there's a little nuances that are a little bit different. If I could pick the ideal officer, it would be somebody that has some life experience, and educated, and is just somebody I would want that is going to handle a situation if my family were involved. And that's kind of the ideal situation. And like I said, I think our profession is going to have some challenges in the future with people wanting to be police officers. And that may be a good thing, maybe a bad thing, depending on what the future holds, because we could get such a low pool of candidates that it's going to become very difficult to find someone of the quality that we want. And when you lower your quality standards, ultimately you have major problems. And you can see that in larger cities where they have to hire thousands of people every year. The standards just are different. And we have the luxury, I guess, of being in a community where you can pick and choose more or less people, and you can pick the absolute best quality candidate, aside from a city where they don't have much choice because the pool is so small. So that's challenging. So I think, it's also a big picture candidate, meaning, one mistake X number of years ago, in my mind, doesn't necessarily disqualify them unless they're legally disqualified. But what have they done since, and what kind of a person are they? And what's my measure of them being able to protect and serve the community?
Can you talk a little bit about turnover in your department over the time that you've been the chief?
It's pretty low attrition, number of retirements, several officers have moved on to federal agencies or larger agencies, one smaller agency for personal reasons. So it's a pretty low attrition rate. Right now we're fully staffed and have been for, about a year and a half, which is unusual typically because of attrition and people retiring and things like that. So a pretty low attrition rate, which I'm happy about.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
In terms of I think you've spoken of the officer wellness, the sixth pillar of the community policing. Have you undertaken specific actions within the department to deal with that?
Yeah, a number of years ago, we implemented something called it sounds funny, but it's an early warning system. It's like a spreadsheet, and you assign points to certain things that occur in an employee's career. Are they disciplined? Are they excessively using sick time? Are they injured? Et cetera, et cetera. And there's a whole list of items that you assign point value to. And once it gets to a certain point value, then there's a mandatory counseling session that they have to meet with one of our EIP people. And I think personally, we've gotten a lot better at EAP, Employee Assistance Program. We call quickly now when we have a critical incident. death of a child, death of someone, horrible accident. Really, we had a bad situation a number of years ago that involved an officer that was injured. And the quicker we get EAP involved to come right to the department and talk to everybody, typically the better off that is. And I think we're starting to learn as a society that, you know, if I was out for a few days and they said, well, why are you out? I had the flu, oh, you feeling better? Versus if I came in and said, why are you out? Well, I was depressed. People would be like, whoa, you're depressed. What's wrong with you? And so we haven't yet gotten to the level of comfort in our nation that mental health is equated with physical health. We're slowly getting there, and it's a really important component. And, you know, I've talked a little bit about this, but in comparison to Massachusetts, Connecticut has a lot more comprehensive police accountability laws. And one component, which is a good one, and I had a conversation with a professional recently about it, and it seems like it's making some good progress, is there's a mandatory officer wellness meeting every 5 years with a psychologist. So everybody in the department has to meet with a psychologist for like an hour, talk about things, and that is a step in the right direction in that regard. And I think that's a really important component there, appreciating the stress, the cumulative stress of policing, and the ways you repress things when you see something horrible happen, and how it can affect you personally and professionally. And it's really important that you have those support systems in place, you know, get AEP in place. When you see an employee behaving out of sorts, maybe there's something going on in their personal life, maybe they need some kind of help, maybe you can get them, moving them to a professional and get them moving in the right direction and correct that behavior rather than before it becomes so profound that it affects their work. So I think it's a really important component of officer wellness and safety. And that goes to training, that goes to getting resources in place, you know, and recognizing that, you know, certain trauma that emergency services sees becomes cumulative and affects them as they do their work. So it's really important to get a professional on board to talk through that and get the employees and the officers the help they need.
Moving into financial management. Are you responsible for developing the police department budget?
I am. Yep.
And can you tell us how, you know, your philosophy of how you allocate resources and how you control costs and how you, you know, sort of prioritize programs?
Of course. So one of the first things I did was implement a electronic scheduling system, which has been extremely powerful. I'm not sure what Walpole PD uses, but for example, when I first took over, we had a spreadsheet that was our schedule. And when you try to analyze that, it's almost impossible when they're handwritten and marks all over it. And so we implemented an electronic scheduling system that's kind of like a dashboard, and it's one of my screens in my office, and I can look at it and I can see what our staffing levels are at, when we need to hire people. I can run an overtime report. And now I think I have 26 different reasons of overtime, because give you a little perspective is when I would do budget presentations, and I have to do 3 of the same presentations before various boards in the budget year, I would often get questions and a lot of resistance about overtime. No one likes overtime. And part of the reason was nobody really explained it, about the necessary part of overtime and why, what's contractual obligations, why are we spending it, why do we have to? And literally some board members thought that there was a desk at the police department and an officer would come up and say, hey, I want to make some extra money this week, give me some overtime. And they'd say, sure, here you go. But that's not reality, right? So the scheduling system helped us build kind of an analytical framework to present and show the percentages of what we're spending and why we're spending it. And that was a really powerful tool. And I build a budget every year. I do kind of a zero-based budgeting. I look at each line. I look at past spending, the actuals, and then I balance it out and figure out what we may need to spend. And I'm very conservative in that way. And sometimes my people give me grief and they say, you know, you're running this place like a business. I said, well, it is a business, and that's why I run it this way. And I'm very careful about how we spend money, very thoughtful. And typically at the end of the year, we are several percentage points below. We have an overage in our budget, several percentage points, because we're so careful on how we spend money.
Going into, you know, we talked a little bit about staffing.
Could I just
Oh,
ask
I'm sorry.
one quick
Sorry.
question? I'm sorry.
I apologize.
So the strategic plan that you talked about earlier,
Yes.
That's over some period of time, and maybe you could talk about that. But what I'm really interested in is how you tie the financial implications of the strategic plan into the financial planning and forecasting process, both in terms of the current year, but more importantly, the out years, and how you think about the budget, preparing the budget, selling the budget, making sure that people understand the why of the equation, et cetera.
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's something I've learned, I think, to do pretty well. I think, I build a PowerPoint, I think that's pretty powerful, and it's not just numbers and things, it's explaining and explaining what the return on investment is for the town, what we're doing, why we're doing it, and how we're getting there. It's kind of like, before I get into the raw numbers, before I do the presentation, I show what we've done, how many lives have we saved, how many investigations did we do, how did we touch the community, impact the community in a variety of different ways. And that's a really important component to selling the budget and explaining it. So connecting it back, the strategic plan is kind of in a 5-year plan of where we're going and how we're gonna get there. It doesn't go into great detail in as far as individual financial impacts, but it did. It does to some degree, specifically for technology, and that's something we usually forecast out, and we're able to push that out. I do a 5-year capital plan for capital items to better understand what's looking forward in the future, and so that's a really helpful tool for the town to plan in that regard. And typically we get guidance every year as our operating budget. Keep it under 2%, keep it under 1.5, whatever that is. And I'm usually able to keep it under that percentage point, unless it's a contractual obligation that's been negotiated, then it's really difficult to do that. So I'm very thoughtful about how we plan that out, and typically, for example, something that we've seen is a very powerful tool, which is interesting. We've seen about a 250% increase in stolen cars in our town. Just tremendous. It's a Connecticut thing. It's a statewide thing. You're not really seeing it here, thankfully. And it's people leaving their keys in their cars and stealing them. It's kids from the cities coming, stealing the cars, joyriding, sometimes committing crimes with them, et cetera. And we had a really complex murder investigation a couple of years ago, and we learned how valuable license plate reader data is, and specifically fixed license plate reader data. And we used that in that investigation. And now we're about to ask in the upcoming budget for an allocation to purchase fixed license plate readers for certain locations so that we can track and investigate some of these crimes that are happening. Because it's an extremely useful tool in building a timeline of a crime. And we have license plate readers in some of our cars, but they're all over the place. So the fixed license plate readers, I believe, are a good investment. That's an example of how we kind of tie that into an emerging issue, and making everyone realize how important it is. And I'm hopeful that it's going to get approved.
Thank you.
Well,
So we've talked a lot about, community policing and this program that's out there, this national, policy or report. How, and we've talked about how that impacts the community, how that impacts residents. We've talked about how that impacts the wellness and well-being of the officers and taking care of the officers and people in the department. But how does that come to bear then in your mind on the financial management aspect? I mean, when we're talking about a 5-year plan, and you had mentioned earlier, well, maybe some of our response forces need to be transitioned to more of a social services role or some different type of response, conceivably, right? And that's kind of the discussion that everybody's having at this point. What does that mean for the financial management of the department? Generally, its hiring practices, but also it seems to me, and having no background in policing myself, that impacts a lot on the training. And so whether that's talking about officer wellness, being prepared for the circumstances they're entering and the events that they're taking part in, or it's talking about training from, again, as you referred to, going from a warrior mindset to a guardian mindset, which is certainly a challenge, and that takes a lot of training as well. So maybe you could expand a little bit upon how that affects your financial management, but also your budget
Sure.
in terms of training and personnel.
Sure, and you know, as far as financial management, when I first took over, we had two overtime lines that were very convoluted in how it was being spent. So we broke that apart into 6 different lines in our budget so that we can better allocate and figure out what we're spending in each line. The sick, injury, training, et cetera, general overtime, accumulated time, hiring back through the labor agreement, all that. And so we've been able to kind of forecast out to some degree. And there's smart ways to do training that doesn't cost a lot. One of the more powerful training concept that I've seen work is we do on-shift training. For example, if we have X number of officers working and it's above a minimum shift, we can segregate a few officers and we can create a scenario in a house perhaps that's being knocked down. We can put safety actions in place so it's safe. And then we can run officers through a scenario, a simulated situation, and see how they act. And in fact, one of the more powerful training tools that I'm advocating for, and I think I've gotten approval for, is we're in the midst of either a building renovation or a new building. And one of the components in either, which I think everybody's embraced, is a virtual reality room. And that's a 300-degree room where officers can be put through hundreds of different scenarios regarding emotionally disturbed persons, autism awareness, violent situations, all that. And you can run officers through scenarios like that on shift, so it doesn't really cost you. Certainly there's an initial capital investment of that room, but the training is just invaluable in that regard. And that's something that I wish states would implement in every part of the state so that all departments could embrace that. But that's something that I'm a strong advocate for. I think that's a really powerful tool to have that virtual reality training, to be able to have officers do that and run through those scenarios multiple times. Because if you think about it, if you visualize something and you've gone through that scenario 1,000 times, the likelihood of you reacting well and handling that well next time in a real live situation is much higher. And I've seen that happen. And embracing tools. I'm pretty thoughtful about a number of years ago when I was a captain. Our canine program had ended X number of years prior, and I saw the need for having a canine for a lot of different reasons. And I realized that the town wasn't going to fund it. So I went out and I raised nearly $100,000 to fund that canine program, which is still running independently from that now. And there's been several dogs that have been brought through that. Enormous support in the community for animals and donations of small and large. So that's just another example of thinking outside the box and trying to figure that out. And connecting back to the whole behavioral health, mental health call component, we were actually the first agency in Connecticut to embrace something called the BOLA rap. And if you're curious later, you have time, you should Google it and go on YouTube and see what that's all about. It's pretty much it's a cable that shoots out and wraps around a person's legs or arms, and it's made specifically for a non-violent, emotionally disturbed person, so that you can secure them, get them in custody, and get them the help they need without resorting to another tool that can cause more harm. So I like thinking outside the box, and that's a relatively inexpensive tool given the possibilities of how it can better handle a situation.
So in terms of thinking outside the box, we're all very familiar, and I think that the Walpole Police Department has done a good job of community policing, say, in the first couple layers of the practice. Mm-hmm. I think they've done a phenomenal job, actually. And so what we've had a more difficult time doing, and a more difficult time because frankly it's a challenge, right? Not because there's been resistance to it necessarily, is getting to the next layers of community policing. So when we're talking about training, or we're talking about officers responding, I guess first, what experience have you had with more of the softer trainings, like unconscious bias, mm-hmm. or changing the mindset of folks going into certain situations? What experience have you had in it, and what's your viewpoint on it? But then more broadly, how is that applied? How does a town like Walpole move past kind of the first couple layers of that and get deeper into making that transition as a town and as a police department?
Yeah, I mean, that takes time. It's not going to be done overnight, certainly. I think we've transitioned to that to the point where it's an interesting story. So right after George Floyd's murder, there was an organized effort to have a march to our town, first ever in history. Thousands of people, right? It was a huge amount of people. And a lot of concern from various people about how that might go, various issues that might unfold from that. And reality is I actually led the march, and along with a bunch of my officers that decided to march in it. It was the most peaceful, community, cooperative thing that I've ever experienced, and really, it was a pretty wonderful experience. But connecting back to that, at the end of the march, I was talking to a few officers that were directing traffic, and a gentleman came up to me and he said, I don't live here, but if every police department was like your police department, we wouldn't have any problems in this nation. So that's something that was kind of endearing to me, that something's working, and it works well. And it takes time, right? It takes time to build that, and I think you have the good components in place here. I think it's just, you can never say it's enough, and I think it just needs to continue and be perpetual. And there's lots of ways you can do that. Frankly, the philosophy is the police get called to do things that no one else is there to do or wants to do. Should the police handle homelessness? Probably not. Should they handle substance use? Probably not. Should they handle behavioral health calls? Probably not. But they do in a lot of different ways. And so I think frankly, as a nation, we need to get smarter about how we're approaching these issues and how we can handle them better. And I've seen communities handle these well recently, where, like I said, there's a triaging of the call in the dispatch center. They make a determination about whether the police need to be on scene or not. If they don't, then they dispatch. I mean, for example, one community near me, they have I think they have maybe 600, 700 calls of psychiatric calls a year, right? So it's a comparable number to what Walpole is seeing. And they engaged a outside contractor, masters of social worker, certified counselor, I think for $75,000. And she works Monday through Friday, and a tremendous tool. And sometimes she goes alone on the calls if there's no danger or fear, and that's something you have to figure out and make sure that you're doing it smartly so no one gets hurt. And then she follows up, and I think that's the most powerful version of that. And that's something perhaps that would be a good thing. And given the call volume that I see here for emotionally disturbed persons calls, any from I saw one number was 250 and a number that was 600. So that's a fair number of calls that maybe some of those can be redirected. And the reality is, policemen don't necessarily want to handle those calls. They just get sent to them and they don't have a choice. So maybe there's a better way we can approach that, and there's better ways we can fix these other social issues or address them with a professional, instead of having the police in a position that maybe aren't trained that well to handle. And so I think there's lots of ways we can get there. It's just, it's a kind of a change in course for policing and for our nation in a lot of ways. But it could end up being a very good thing if it's done smartly and correctly.
Bernie, how about if we pause right here just for a minute, because we've used up a lot of our time, so.
Yeah, I
How about if we go around to each select board member and just see, do you have a couple questions on your sheet that we haven't gotten to that you want to ask right now? Does that make sense? Glenn, you have anything you want to ask right away?
I'll just start with one, and then maybe you can come back to me
Sure.
to see if I have any follow-up. But so you actually, this transitions nicely with what you were talking about the mental health and the follow-ups, because, how you handle and triage a call for mental health is important, but then what happens next? What happens when everybody goes home, back to the station, and that person still has mental health issues? That doesn't go away for them, just the call ends. And so you talked about having a counselor on staff as one possible solution. So I guess I'll ask you, is there anything beyond that? But then also transitioning over to substance abuse, so drug sales and distribution is crack down on that, but perhaps the person who's abusing the substance, who has an issue, and resulting in maybe a Narcan situation, which you send somebody off to an emergency room and their life is hopefully saved, but then what happens after that? So, can you talk about a little bit more? You did just a little bit just now, but just expand on that a little bit?
Sure. It's something I've thought about a lot, and we've implemented some changes in the way we do things. So we have, like Walpole, we have a crisis intervention trained officers, but it's called COAST. It's a community action support team kind of thing. And we have officers on every shift that are trained in that regard, and they each have that bowler wrap device that I mentioned, so that they can go to a critical incident or a psychiatric incident and handle that really well. So that's one component. Maybe you have a certain segment of officers that are on each shift that get trained to a higher level than everyone else even if everyone else is crisis intervention trained, which is a good thing. And then the other component is, like I mentioned, we have a volunteer director of behavioral health who's a psychiatrist, and volunteers his time. He used to be a her, but now it's a him, and is an enormous resource. When we have really complex psychiatric issues with certain people, we can talk through issues and get their advice and recommendations and things like that, because the state has certain resources available, but they're limited in a lot of ways. So that if we can create those local resources and more communication, which we've learned, we communicate better with our Health and Human Services Department. There's nurses, there's masters of social workers there. We pass along information about certain incidents we go on and calls we go on, and we kind of communicate a lot better than we used to. And that's another way to build that network of communication so that you can get people to help. The ideal situation is you go on a call once and you get people the help they need, so you never have to go again. That's an ideal situation, to get them the help they need. But that's not reality these days, unfortunately, because of diminishing resources and things like that. So I think there's a real possibility of maybe some kind of I think there's a lot of professionals that would volunteer their time. You got to find the right professional. Maybe there could be somebody in Walpole called the Director of Behavioral Health that's qualified to do that and would like to volunteer their time and give their professional advice. And then on staff in the department, someone, a social worker or a counselor that's qualified, could go to some of these calls and do the wellness afterwards and connect people with resources so that we can kind of mitigate those calls and get the people the help they need.
So
before it
collaboration
escalates.
with the health department, it sounds like.
Absolutely, yeah, it's got to be a town-wide effort. I mean, it's really important.
Have you found that, it sounds like you have a single staff member in New Canaan who's a counselor who provides that follow-up service?
We don't. We have a director of behavioral health for the town that connects with us and gives us advice, and then our officers are trained. We have the luxury of having a pretty well-known psychiatric hospital in town, so they're able to give us training that other communities can't get. But that doesn't mean it's impossible, and so that's a really important component too.
That's all.
Ben?
Just kind of building off of what Glenn said, and then also a discussion about, you described the march that you took part in and the Black Lives Matter movement. What are some specific changes or responses that you've had in light of all of the recent developments socially, in our country and also in New England?
Yeah, I mean, I think the way we approached that march, which was the first one in history, was different than it would have been handled X number of years ago. We had a lot of resources available in case things went sideways, but they were out of sight, and it was really a supportive role to make sure that the march could happen and that it was as safe and productive as it could be. I spoke at some point in the march, and in fact, one of the organizers said, this isn't against your department, it's against the national issue that we're seeing that's affecting people of color. And, I appreciated that, and I said a few words, and so that was a really productive thing. And so I think, we've done implicit bias training, which is important to kind of have that awareness for everybody, that everybody has a bias in this room, right? It's just a matter of how you're acting on it and how you're making decisions. Are you making decisions because you're biased, or you're making decisions because of facts? And that's really important for policing, to make sure that you're making a factual decision and it's not some kind of bias that you're acting on. So that's an important component there too. And that's been a useful thing to think about. I've gone through a couple of different training sessions just to see what's out there. And if there's any benefit from COVID, it's training has gotten better remotely than ever before. So we can embrace training tools we never thought were possible before because of COVID and because of the technology that's been in place. So that's a positive thing. I think you can reinforce that. And like I said, if you do that implicit bias training and you have the luxury of having something like that virtual reality room, and you actually do live scenarios that are simulated, combining all that will result in a better trained officer that is likely going to handle a situation well, versus one who is thrown into a situation that doesn't know what to do. And think about it, most of us in the room have minutes, hours, days to make a decision. Police officer goes on scene, he has a millisecond sometimes to make a decision. So you want to make sure that you're investing in that. I mean, for example, this virtual reality room is $250,000. And I said, what was a verdict out in the Midwest? 26 million. And I've seen verdicts in our state from hundreds of thousands to millions of dollars. So it's all a matter of, and I get it, you want to be fiscally conservative, but if I'm telling you as a professional that if you spend $250,000 on this virtual reality room, our officers are going to be 100% better trained, to me, that's a great investment. And to know that if they go on a scene that one of our family members is at, that they're going to handle that situation perfectly. And, I'll connect in a real-life situation. We had a call in our center of town of a gentleman who was yelling expletives and acting out. Officers went there. Some of the officers on scene were crisis trained to that higher level, and they interacted with the gentleman, and they actually engaged him and determined that he was not committing a crime, even though he had a gallon of gas and an axe in his back seat. And a little concerning, but not criminal. So he moved on. Fast forward, X number of months later, he was in another community with a U-Haul truck full of gasoline, and ended up fighting with the officers, ended up getting arrested, had a stolen gun, et cetera, certainly behavioral health issues, but that resulted in really increased trauma. So that training component that we've done in a lot of ways has really helped with real life situations. And I could relate a bunch of different situations that have happened that I believe was as a result of our training that were handled well. Thanks.
Nancy?
I'm all set.
Jim?
Yeah, so just a couple of quick things and then a comment. When you're in your resume, you said that you led a cyber vulnerability tabletop exercise for the town and the school system. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Sure.
What you actually did?
Sure. I pretty much, it was recognizing how much, this was 5 or 6 years ago, but recognizing how much cyber plays in our lives even then, but up to today, it's even more significant. And realizing that a cyber threat is probably going to be a threat that could take down a town or a city. And I've seen that happen in Connecticut and in other states. So what it was is I built a PowerPoint exercise based on a Department of Homeland Security exercise, lesson plan, and we walked through our IT department with a scenario. This happens, how to react. This just happened, how to react. And kind of an escalating series of incidents to the point where to see what measures they had in place to mitigate the threat. And did a similar instance that was a little bit different with our Board of Education, because we have a Board of Education IT department. And certainly if student records are accessed and hacked, that's an enormous problem. And so that was a little distinct in the exercise that we had was someone was trying to interrupt our computer systems or hack into our databases, and what's your response? What's your response plan? How do you mitigate that? And that resulted in some changes in hardware, in monitoring, in policies. That was a very useful thing to do, and it was a productive thing. I had an FBI agent there that's a cyber specialist, and we're part of a cyber task force federally, and because that's where we're seeing a tremendous amount of cyber crime happening, and I'm sure it's very similar here. So that's a really powerful thing to do, and it's an important learning tool.
Very helpful. I want to come back, and you can be rather brief on this because you have touched on it a couple times, but this is you've got a couple of expansive statements here in your 1 through 10 in your cover letter.
Sure.
And I'd like you to touch on what is number 9 and number 10. So number 9 is adopting cutting-edge de-escalation and use of force initiatives. 10 is embracing innovative behavioral health initiatives for both response and mitigation, which includes creating a town-wide director of behavioral health. Again, you've touched on that in bits and pieces along the way, but if you could just speak to those very directly, that'd be great.
Yeah, sure. So the use of force tool specifically is that bowler wrap tool. And in fact, for a number of years, I don't know if Walpole PD has pepper spray or caps done. For a number of years, we didn't have it, and we recently reenacted it because it's another tool you can use in a situation that isn't going to harm someone, but may help you bring them in control. So the bowler wrap was really the predominant tool for that. And then the scenario-based training, which we've been doing live for officers running the scenarios to make decisions about use of force, make decisions about tactics, that's a really powerful tool there. And then the innovative behavioral health concept, that kind of ties back to when we saw an emerging issue related to overdoses and heroin, overdoses. Specifically, we were one of the first agencies to implement Narcan and issue it to our officers, saved a number of lives in that regard, which is something very satisfying, I think, for everyone. And then connecting it to the need to have a professional giving the town advice on substance use, on behavioral health. I mean, we saw it all, and increases in activity during COVID. Thankfully, the substance, the overdoses have fallen off for a lot of different reasons. But it's all interconnected to behavioral health. Typically, people self-medicate because they have behavioral health issues and they're ashamed to get the help they need. And some people don't have the resources or the outreach that they need. And I think we've gotten a lot smarter at the resources we provide and how we see behavioral health and what we can do as part of the equation. We're not the solution in a lot of ways, but we're part of that puzzle. And if we can put everyone together, working together, then usually we can move things in a better direction.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Welcome.
And my comment would just be, you have an impressive resume, and I have appreciated your straightforward answers to these questions, particularly the ones that the board was firing at you kind of, based on other things you were saying. So I appreciate your time here today, and thought your answers were very helpful and concise and clear. Thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Okay.
So let me ask the next question. So,
Yes.
assuming we were to pick you as our police chief,
Yes.
how would you work to get to know the department better over, say, the first 30 days?
Sure.
And the same with the general public and the department heads in town and all those kind of things?
Sure. I'm like I explained, individual meetings are big. I would do ride-alongs, work different hours, work with different shifts, go to roll calls, talk to people, in groups and individual groups, and then individually, and kind of build on that. I have like a notebook that I keep, and I keep track of all the information, where we're going, what I'm planning to do, and that's how I would gather information in that regard. And then I would reach out to all the stakeholders. I would like to meet with you individually, each of you, and in a group if that's acceptable too. Sometimes it's easier to meet with people that are in political roles individually than as a group for public meeting reasons, right? And then reach out to the superintendent of schools, the fire chief, whoever heads EMS, certainly the town administrator, everybody I would meet with and kind of get their perspective on things, so that I can kind of move things forward and build on that. And it takes a little bit of time. Everybody's a little bit nervous, a little anxious about a change, but gradually, once people accept that and they see that things are going to go in a different direction, but perhaps better for everybody, then everybody gets a little bit more comforted for that. And I think that's an important thing. And it's a lot of listening, right? I mean, that's a really important thing. I could come in, I've heard stories of people taking over management of companies or businesses and doing really crazy, horrible things, and just to kind of get everybody's attention. But it's smarter to come in and listen and take notes and think about things, unless you see something really out of the ordinary. And there's a list of things that are important that I have to understand early on about things, litigation, criminal cases, all that, grievances, workplace prohibited practices. Are there any of those things going on that I need to be aware of so that we can address those? And then gradually kind of wade into the day-to-day dynamics of figuring out everybody, their positions, who they are, what they're all about, learning about everyone, and then gradually moving everybody in the same direction. But the most important part is enabling people and getting them, empowering them, and getting them excited about something. Everybody has something they're really excited about. You just have to figure out what that is, and then if you can enable that. And I told people, I said, look, you may have the most amazing idea in the world, but it costs X million of dollars. I'm going to tell you that that's not realistic. It's probably not going to happen. But maybe we can adjust that and figure it out and bring it down to the point where it's cost effective, but it still achieves the purpose. So it's a building block kind of concept. It takes time, but like I said, I'll invite the community in. I have an open door policy. Talk to anybody that wants to talk. I would go out and walk the center of town, talk to people. And in fact, something I wasn't able to touch on, but it was an important thing that we did, which has been very successful, is we have a very similar center of town to some degree that Walpole has. And the business district, there was a lot of fraud and a lot of theft and some crimes occurring, bank robbery and some other robberies happening that caused a lot of concern. So we did some fraud prevention training for the business owners, and then ultimately we created something called a community impact officer, and that's an officer assigned to the center of town throughout the year. They're either on foot, they're in a car, they have a cell phone, the business owners have their cell phone number, they can text them, they can call them, and it's kind of a first point of contact aside from an emergency that builds a great rapport. So that's an important thing, that maybe that's a great model for here too. So I suspect that could work really well.
So let me see if there's any final questions, and then we'll wrap it up and turn it back to Bernie, so.
I think it was pretty thorough. I'm all set.
Okay.
Thanks.
Ben?
No, thank you.
My pleasure.
All set, thank you.
I'm good, thank you.
Okay,
Thank you.
I think we're set
okay.
at this point. You know, again, thank you for going through the process. Thank you for being here tonight.
My pleasure.
And the board will, you know, be making some decisions in the near future.
Excellent.
And I will be in touch.
Thank you. Happy holidays, everybody. If I don't see you again in between, and enjoy the weather, even though it's turning cold on us. But you know, I'm really excited to be here, and I truly, like I said in the intro, I really love being a policeman, and a police chief is able to affect change and make things better for the department and the community as a whole. And you know, I like doing innovative things that are typically cost effective. And I think you know, our profession and policing as a whole needs people to kind of look at things in a different way. And it kind of makes me sad when, you know, a couple of years ago, and to this day, a lot of people think that 99.9% of policemen are doing the job, a bad job, and they're hurting people needlessly. And it makes me sad to hear that, because it's a very small percentage of bad actors, if you will. And so I think it's important for us as leaders in law enforcement to make sure that we're doing the best we can, and you know, moving things in the right direction. And as difficult as police accountability has been for policing as a whole, I think it's going to lead to some good and some change that needed to happen in a lot of different ways. So I mean, I think you know, most officers come to work wanting to help people, not wanting to hurt them, and I think that's an important thing. And like I said, going back to the whole concept, policy, training, oversight, if you're missing that, then there's likely going to be something in the near future that's going to happen that shouldn't have happened.
Thanks, Chief.
Great.
My pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Of course.
Board, ready to go?
I think a brief.
You guys want a couple, why don't we say we'll reconvene in 5 minutes?
Okay, great, thank you.
Thanks. ready to switch back over? We're on now? We're continuing our police chief search meeting with the next candidate, which is Rich Kelleher. Welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Sure. So what we'll do is Bernie's going to sort of lead the discussion. He'll get us going. Board members will jump in when they have a related question. Then we'll ask a round of questions at the end, and then we'll wrap up. Does that make sense?
Outstanding, yeah, very good.
Okay. Bernie?
Okay, well, Rich, thanks for being here, and thanks for your going through the entire process. I know it's been a long journey for you. But for the board and for the public that's watching, we know your background based on your resume, but maybe just give a little introduction of yourself, and specifically, why you're interested in the chief's position here in Walpole, and where it fits into the arc of your career.
Okay, sounds good. Well, for those of you who don't know me, my name is Rich Kelleher. I am the interim police chief here in Walpole. I've been in law enforcement for 16 years, past 14 of which have been with the Walpole Police Department. I started my career with Medfield PD in 2005. I served a variety of roles here with the Walpole Police Department, including patrolman, detective for a long period of time. I was a patrol supervisor and a detective supervisor. And then would become the deputy chief in 2020 and took over as the interim chief earlier this year. I'd love to become the Walpole Police Chief because, quite simply, I've worked here for a long period of time. I've been part of the organizational change that has brought this department to become more community-oriented and to build trust and relationships with the community that we serve, and a community that we have a tremendous amount of support from, which I'm extremely grateful. Also, I've worked with a lot of the officers that work there right now. A lot of them I've worked with my whole career, some of which I've been a part of hiring or hired myself, and I care deeply about each and every one of them. They mean a lot to me. I know them personally. So to have the opportunity to be before you tonight is an honor. To have the opportunity to continue to lead this department in a more permanent role.
Can I actually jump in right there?
Yeah, that's
So he
perfect.
talks about the arc of your career, and certainly becoming police chief wouldn't be the culmination. That would be continuing on the arc. So could you actually expand kind of like where your career goes within Walpole if you become the Walpole police chief, and what you would hope to accomplish, how that fits into your goals? You see Walpole as a department that largely you're going to lead it in the same direction it's always been, or do you have a kind of a vision that might differ from that?
So yes, obviously, arc of my career, this came about quite quickly, in my opinion. I'm 16 years in. I have some time to go. So, in terms of my vision, I firmly believe in the direction that we're going right now. I know that might sound the easy answer to sit here and say I'm happy with what we're doing. Is what we're going to keep doing. But I firmly believe that we're on a path to building relationships with our community members, to having more programs and community policing related programs that could again build these relationships, which is extremely important. It's going to be much more important going forward. So what I'd like to do in my vision is to expand upon what we've done very well already and continue that into the future and navigate through what's going to be some interesting years going forward with police reform and other things coming down the line.
Thanks, Rich.
Well, it's sort of sticking with that same vein, being the leader of the department is certainly the role of the police chief. In moving it forward, what is your vision of what the Walpole Police Department can be, or a police department can be or should be in a community?
What we should be in the community are guardians for every member of the community. We've moved from that warrior mindset of years back to now more guardian mindset, and that's what I envision a police department should be. We're in that direction right now, and that's where I see us going in the future, and that's where I would like to take our department in the future. Again, it's to expand upon the great things that we're doing, to try to engage different members of our community, all members of our community, different demographics, so everybody feels like that we represent each one of them. And that's where I see the role of a police department, to make sure everybody in the community feels like they're safe living here, that they are included in our community. And by continuing on the path that we're on, to expand upon what we've been doing, to engage every member of this community to make them feel safe is exactly what we should be doing, and I'd like to expand upon that in the future.
So what's the style that we would see of a Chief Kelleher in terms of leading the department? How do you bring the department, keep them going on that path, or you know, maybe at some point in the future varying from that a little bit to make it even better in a different way?
How I lead is really by doing right now. I am ensuring that things that I do each and every day, they see me do. And that gets into community engagement and things of that nature. I also envision the way I treat our officers, the way I give them a voice in things that go on in our department. I want them to give that, show that to the community members as well. And so, as a leader, I like to give our officers the autonomy to do their jobs, to make sure they're well-trained and well-prepared to do their jobs, and also feel like that they're able to without, you know, being micromanaged or anything like things of that nature. So, yes, I employ the tenets of 21st century policing within our own agency, and I think that would translate into what they will continue to do with the future, with the residents.
Okay. All right. You've spoken of the importance of the relationship of the department and the members of the department with the community. How do you, as chief, and perhaps you're already doing this, so maybe you could just describe what you're doing, or maybe you have some ideas of ways that you would grow this. How would you develop the relationships to the community beyond what they are now, for you as well as for the department?
So, again, it's through engaging and engaging all of our members of the community. So and I know that sounds almost like it's been repetitive, but what we do is right now we are trying to reach out and develop different programs to make sure that we can, again, bring everybody in so they feel like they're included. So, you know, essentially what we are doing is trying to expand upon our programs to bring things into some of the new developments that are being built right now, so that way we can engage those members. We build that trust, which is it's the utmost importance to me and to our department.
Can you expand upon that? I'd be curious. I'm just curious as to how you're getting, it's like a new development's coming in.
So, yeah, I'm sorry to interrupt you. So what we do is we have as part of our community engagement team, we have a liaison group. And what that group does is they will go out and they'll interact with they'll be the point of contact for each one of these complexes and these apartment buildings. And what we do is we'll do a number of different things for them. We'll provide, you know, security assessments for their building, but we'll also, host events like Coffee with a Cop. We'll do cookouts with a cop in the summertime, and we'll get our officers up there to interact with the folks that live there. That way, they feel like they have an officer that they have a relationship with, and they can come to with issues that may need to be addressed, and then those can in turn be addressed at a higher level by putting resources where they need to go, and things of that nature.
Okay. One of the aspects of community relations that a number of departments have identified as a hurdle, if you will, that with regards to community relations is a sense of transparency of what's going on in the department. What actions have you taken to, or have you thought about to make the Walpole Police Department more transparent with with community members?
So we have a heavy presence on social media. Our Facebook page regularly illustrates what these officers do each and every day. They show who they are, their names, so that they know them. They almost like they feel that they have a relationship with them. And I feel that by having our officers be accessible, well, they're known through the social media, but it helps the residents or the people in the community feel like they know us a little bit. So also, it's something that I had thought about, and this has yet to be implemented, was to make our policies more accessible. I know some communities have posted their policies and procedures openly on their website, and that's something that we've discussed. Obviously, there's some that we cannot disclose because of tactical reasons and officer safety reasons, but I think there's absolutely nothing wrong with having the community really see what we're all about and how how we do business internally. Also, in terms of transparency, and this is a little bit off, but we have a robust citizen complaint program where people can come in, fill out a form to file a complaint, if should they feel like they need to. And we will ensure that we will investigate that complaint appropriately and either educate the person on why the officer did it, or we will deal with an issue that may come up. So it further enhances our, that we're not afraid to show our flaws, and we're readily available to meet with people and to correct those issues if need be.
I know we're using the term community a lot here, and maybe I should have staggered the questions a little bit, but certainly for the last 30 years, thereabouts, there's been such an emphasis on the notion of community policing. We use the term so much now when we speak about policing. What does community policing mean to you?
It means addressing issues that may come up within the community by being accessible, by having our officers interact with the members of the community regularly, problem solving, quality of life issues. So by us being involved in the community regularly, they see our officers, again, this liaison program at these buildings, and having community engagement team that goes out and works with businesses and other members of the community. It allows us to engage them and then determine what the problems are that they have that are quality of life related, and then help solve them. And that, to me, was the essence of community policing.
Okay. One area that is, has sort of come with the growth of community policing is the relationship with the police department and different other departments of the town. Can you give us some examples of where you see the police department functioning cooperatively with other departments, most notably the schools, but the array of departments that are out there?
Right, so to speak about the schools, we work very closely with them. We have, again, we have mentors assigned to each of our schools. We have a school resource officer dedicated to all of our schools to handle a variety of issues that may come up. We work closely with the principals of each of those schools, so that that way they know, they know our officers. We've implemented a number of the active shooter related training, ALICE training at each one of our schools, so that way they understand we're on the same page with them. So that takes an enormous amount of collaboration. And also, in relation to some of those issues, we collaborate closely with the fire department, because in training for these issues at the schools, we rope in the fire department as well, because they are an essential part of that response. So we work closely with them, obviously on a regular basis for a variety of reasons, but in the school-related arena as well. So it's important to have constant communications with all the different department heads in town. I feel like I work very well with them right now. We work well with, if we have issues related to roadways, we work well with the DPW. If it's an issue with the police and fire response, we work well with Chief Bailey. And again, with the schools, it's with a variety of issues when it comes to school safety and educating, helping the kids, engaging the youth of the community, where we work well with the school superintendent as well. So it's important to have interdepartmental communication and collaboration.
Okay.
Let me jump in with a follow-up. So I think Walpole does a good job with community policing. As you think about community policing going forward, it has evolved over the years. How do you think it's going to evolve over the next few years? Are there new ideas you're thinking of, or new ideas you're hearing about in other places, that kind of stuff?
So, yeah, we have, as you know, we have a very robust program. So it's certainly worth looking at to take a step back and see what we can improve upon. And we do quite a bit. So it's going to take some, a little bit of of thought to come up with new and different things to do regularly. I see it continuing. Community policing is the new way of doing business, and it's going to stay this way for a long period of time. And we are committed here. I've committed since I've been a member of this department to community policing, and I see it becoming a bigger part of what we do and a bigger part of what law enforcement does in general, because we need to develop the trust with members of this community, and by doing so, by engaging in them through a variety of these programs that we have now and expanding upon them in the future, we're going to continue to build that trust, which is incredibly important, because without trust, we don't have any legitimacy, and we will essentially be ineffective.
Thanks.
Just sticking with that for just one more second, 1 minute. One of the aspects of community policing is really learning what people are looking for. What mechanism would you have to sort of get ideas from the residents or the businesses as to ways that it can be a two-way street of providing policing services?
So we've done 2 citizen surveys. One was in 2013, and most recently one was this past year. The one we did initially was what really transformed how we do business. We received a lot of feedback that the community and the public wanted to see more engagement from our department, and that spurred the transition into being more community-oriented. Most recently, we did receive more feedback on a variety of quality of life issues, which we're working to adapt and to develop new ways to combat right now. But that was the primary mechanism that we used to develop feedback from the community and to really have our community members set our agenda. But I think also, aside from that formal mechanism, there's also accessibility to the police department, and most important, and more specifically, the police chief. So I think it's important to have accessibility with the community members, so that way if they have something that they want us to talk about, they can come in and either meet with an officer in the lobby, or they can come speak with me or a member of leadership. And I think that's kind of an informal way to help the public set our agenda.
Okay, great, thank you. Getting it more into some of the nuts and bolts, we were talking about sort of the leadership aspects of being police chief. Now I want to focus more, I guess, on the management side of things. As the chief, and you kind of alluded to this in your opening statement of why you were interested in the position. You're vested in the personnel of the department. Can you talk to us about how you would hold the employees accountable to, certainly getting them to buy into a vision is a key part of the leadership, but then how do you hold them accountable to make sure that they're doing the job effectively?
Well, first and foremost is to clearly express to them my expectations of them. And that is done in person and through, face-to-face communication. If officers don't know what they're expected to be, what's expected of them, it's very hard to hold them accountable, if you will, or to have them answer to their decisions or actions. Also is follow-up with them, is to make sure that they have the tools that they need to do the job, that they have the skill set needed to do the job, and then to set guidelines and objectives and kind of express to them where I expect, what the expected result's gonna be. And what we do is we'd follow back up with them in a supervisory level and ensure that those things are happening by regular communication with them and regular meetings with them to make sure that these things are being carried out. And if they're not, then adjustments need to be made. Either we repeat the process if it's been determined that the message was not relayed clearly enough by me or a member of the command staff or a supervisor, or we continue on with this person doing that particular job if things went smoothly, or if after repeated attempts to clearly communicate our goals and expectations, things aren't working out, then we need to move them out of that position. So essentially, it's through supervision and through follow-up is how you would hold them accountable.
Okay. In terms of your relationship with the, how about discipline? Can you just describe maybe some, your philosophy of how you use discipline within the department?
Discipline is strictly a measure to correct behavior. We don't use discipline in a punitive way. It is strictly used to ensure that we get a desired outcome or a desired response from our officers. We do things in a standard, progressive way here. We don't just do things based on a person's individual, personality or who they might be. It's done standard across the board, and it's done progressively. We would start at a base level with minor things. We would deal with them with counseling. We would elevate to written reprimands, and then if needed be, there'd be suspensions based upon the severity of it. And again, it's never done to be punitive. It's never done to essentially punish somebody for no reason or to as a retaliatory action for anything. It's strictly to ensure that people understand that we're held to a high standard. We operate at a high standard, and that's how we do business, and that's what we use it for. But it's always progressive and always very standardized.
Hey, Bernie, can I jump in here?
Yep.
So we were just talking about, employees that are already with us. Let's jump all the way back to the beginning. What traits do you look for in potential police officer hires?
We look for well-rounded people. We like experience. We like people that have an interest in law enforcement. However, that's not always necessary. When we meet with folks, we like to see if they understand kind of how the world works, and if they're personable, if they are educated, if they understand the importance of being on a team. That's what we look for. Again, police experience and police education is great. It certainly plays a factor. But having someone that's well-rounded and understands what it means to be a member of an organization like ours, and whether they would be a good fit with our other officers is what we look for.
Thanks.
What actions would you take to diversify the department along those same lines?
So right now, we're continually working to diversify the department, but however, we can always do better. We are in a good spot, but the town is diversifying, and we need to continue on that path. That can be difficult to do in law enforcement, and there's barriers to that, some of which is out of our control. But what we need to do is better engage underrepresented communities, to make them aware that we're a place that that folks may want to work. And that starts, obviously, recruiting is important, but I think if you back up just a little bit, it starts with the organizational culture. That we have an organization that treats everyone with respect and dignity, no matter who they are, whether it's race, religion, sexual orientation, anything. Everybody's the same. Everybody gets treated with respect. If we have an organization that treats everybody with respect, that reputation, cops talk. There's no secret about that. Everybody knows everything about every department around here, and Walpole PD has an incredible reputation. So by creating a culture, organizational culture that allows everybody to be safe in where they work, their reputation gets out there. But also, we have to further go ahead and try to recruit some of these folks. And what you can do, and what an idea that I had kind of thought about is to maybe engage our Walpole's MEDCO program and our diversity and inclusion coordinator. I met with her on an unrelated matter a while back, and I think that maybe speaking with her about I hate recruiting, if you will, or getting our message out there that what kind of department we are, that maybe we can elicit some interest from some of these folks. We left civil service several years back. I know there's always ways to get around residency and hiring a diversified workforce through civil service, but it's much easier when you don't have to deal with all that, those restrictions. So once we left civil service several years ago, we have the ability to take officers from wherever. And we like hiring Walpole people. We love to hire Walpole people. But when we're looking to diversify, to have, again, a more diverse workforce, which is incredibly important for a variety of reasons, it's a good tool to have the flexibility.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, sticking one more question with regards to staffing, your answer regarding the bringing new people on, of having them be well-rounded, how do you promote? What do you look for, and what would be your recommendations in terms of promoting people? What are the characteristics that you'd look for in putting new supervisory people in place?
we look for people that are leaders before they get stripes or bars, quite frankly. And that's an intangible thing, but you know when you see it. When you see officers that have the respect of their peers and the respect of the command staff and the other supervisors, because they do things the right way every day. They carry themselves in a manner which is consistent with our mission, vision, and values. That's what we look for in a leader and a supervisor. It may not always be the person that's, the most educated or the has the most training, but sometimes it might be the person that's the right fit, that does the right things, and everybody has their respect, and that's what we look for in a leader.
Okay, great. Your experience with collective bargaining and administering the collective bargaining agreement, how's that going?
So I was the deputy chief during the most recent contract negotiation. However, I do work closely with our union president on a regular basis. I have a very good working relationship with the sworn patrol officers that are part of the union. So in terms of collective bargaining, I was involved in the last process. I was not on the point of it, but I was involved in the negotiation for the contract, so I got my feet wet in that arena as well. But I work with the union closely. When things come up, we try to manage them as we can as an organization. I mean, as a interdepartment or an internal matter, we try to work them out, and then explain essentially why we're doing things the way we do. And I'm fortunate we have a very reasonable union leadership, and we have mutual respect for each other, and I think it's been very well.
Okay, great, thank you. One more question along the lines of personnel management, and I guess, a more appropriate term might be human resource management. One of the sixth pillar of the 21st Century Policing report speaks of officer wellness and safety. What are your thoughts on how you would implement measures to address that sixth pillar?
Well, first and foremost is officer wellness and its safety too, and that's to ensure that they are well equipped and well trained. That starts, and that is, it begins with me and with the leadership of the department, because we can direct the training and ensure that their equipment gets appropriated to them, and I think that's incredibly important. In terms of wellness, there's physical and emotional wellness, and we are a part of the Metropolitan Law Enforcement Council, which has a peer support group, and we encourage, after a critical incident, that officers get debriefed. I haven't had to get to the point where I've had to order it myself, but I've been ordered to go myself, and that's something that just stays completely separate from the command staff. It's just you need to go talk to some members of your peers and make sure that you're of sound mind to continue to work. I think that's a increasingly important thing in this day and age. That the officers need it's a cumulative effect of responding to bad things all the time is what catches up to you. And we are acutely aware of that, and we utilize that program as needed to ensure that even if it's something that's not an incredibly horrific event, that the officers speak to somebody and just make sure that they're good to go in a sound mind and body. In terms of physical wellness, we're fortunate enough to have an athletic facility, a gym out behind the building, so we encourage that use because it's very close by, and something to look into going forward is to somehow incorporate a workout program. We have several officers that are trained as physical fitness instructors to the MPTC and the academies, and they actually are assigned to academies as instructors. So we can utilize those resources as well to implement some sort of wellness programs, physical wellness, and to help officers stay healthy.
Okay. Sticking with the veering off a little bit from where we were heading perhaps, but in terms of training overall, how much do you prioritize training within the department with just general operations?
It's extremely important. Extremely important. We send our veteran officers to training regularly, and of course, it's dependent upon what they're interested in doing and what their skill set is. But going back to a basic level, our field training program, we've developed to become more robust as we've moved forward. And what I mean by that is we don't just make it longer and have them ride around with more cops and they hear the same war stories and, do all that stuff and ride around in a two-man car all the day long. What we do is we have a program where they're evaluated at each level and they move on. And if there's something we need to do, they come to us and we reevaluate where the officer might be and determine areas they need to improve. But one thing we did do in recent months and actually recent years was develop an applied patrol procedures program, which APP is what that stands for, is traditionally done in the police academy. And that is done towards the end, once it's a culmination of their training. But what we did is we brought that back at the end of our field training in several sessions where we bring officers in and we have them go over, okay, now you've been doing this for a while, now let's go out and we'll practice car stops. And we'll usually use the Council on Aging parking lot next door to our station as a training area at night, after hours. We have them train on building searches. We just did it the other night, just last night, actually. That's something that we do almost all the time that we get very little training on outside of the academy. And people get rusty on that. So after 3 months, after 12 weeks on the road, we'll go back and revisit all this stuff to make sure that the officers understand what they've learned so far and that they can put it together in a hands-on setting. So that was how we, at a basic level, it really bolstered our training to make sure that the officers were ready to go when they got off field training.
Okay, great. My next question, actually, and I was looking at your resume here, your degree from Bentley.
Yes.
Hopefully that's prepared you for the financial management aspects of
It was some time ago, but yes, I worked in the accounting field for a short time as well, so it's coming back to me, like riding a bike.
Accounting never changes.
It
so.
sure doesn't. It's the same, exciting world.
What's your philosophy of creating the department budget? How do you prioritize where to allocate resources? How do you go about managing the budget to make sure that it stays within the appropriate amount?
So, I'm learning this as I go along right now, to be perfectly honest with you. However, it's important to, at the basic level with the budget, is to ensure that you're keeping an eye on what's going on and you're not haphazardly spending overtime money on things that aren't important. And by what I mean by things that are important, we prioritize those things based upon what's going on. If there's incredibly complex investigations that are going on, we'll allocate some funds to detectives to complete those investigations. If we have funds available for community policing, we'll assign more officers to our junior academy in the summertime as we get towards the end of the fiscal year or the beginning of the next fiscal year in July. So we prioritize that based upon what's going on within the department. It's important, though, to, again, pay attention to what's going on. I hate to sound like it's kind of a dumbed-down version of what I'm trying to say, but essentially is what it is. You need to know what you have, understand where you need to be, and keep a close eye on it, and not be irresponsible with funds. As I know, we're a publicly funded organization, that we can't be irresponsible with our finances. So to me, it's important to basically just to keep a very close eye on these things and appropriate these funds where they need to be depending upon what's going on.
Okay. In terms of building the budget at the beginning of the year, how do you, what's the process that you see yourself using to sort of craft that budget to submit for approval?
Again, so it's all dependent upon, again, the town is growing right now. So what I based it upon this particular year, in my experience so far, is basing it upon staffing and where we need to be, and then crafting the infrastructure to support that staff to go along with it. And of course, when you have more officers, you need more things. You need to have, more equipment, more cruisers, more uniforms, weapons, all those things. So that's how I've been doing it this year. You base it upon where we need our growth and the growth of the town and where we need to be, and that by determining the number of people we're going to need to have, follow up with the needs of those people to make that function efficiently and appropriately.
Okay.
So, thinking about the strategic plan and some period of time, 3 years, 5 years, whatever that is, how do you think about building a financial plan that supports the strategic plan, not just in the current year, but in the years that follow? So forecasting out, how do you think about building that? What are the drivers of the strategic plan that they have to factor their way into the financial plan? how do you then turn around and sell that financial plan, explaining why you need what you may need, and be able to cause that strategic plan to then come to life?
That's extremely important, to have a financial plan to go with the strategic plan, because you can have all the wants you'd like, but if you can't afford it, then it doesn't make any sense to have that. So, yeah, so what would go into determining what would be in a financial plan? It would be the cost of what a police officer, or in terms of personnel, what it would cost to hire them, what it would cost to send them to the academy, to equip them, and then what their pay scale would be like based upon the collective bargaining agreement that is usually 3 years out. So we would have to factor all that into building that plan. And then, of course, you would build in the other items, the infrastructure. So, of course, you need to, the cost of our weapon systems, our cost of our ammunition, the cost of fuel going forward, how that might increase. So that would go into building the plan. In terms of selling it, it certainly, you need to be able to articulate the need of the department, what you're gonna need to be effective going forward. And that gets, again, it gets built upon call volume, the types of calls we're responding to, the population in town. So we need to articulate how our responses to those calls justify needing those folks, and again, justifying the cost to go with it.
And so when you think about a strategic plan and looking out several years, how do you think about trends that are occurring within the types of calls that you're seeing? How do you think about the different things you need to do 2 years out, 3 years out, 4 years out? And how do you build that into the financial plan? Because it's not just a question of officers and the infrastructure to support them. It's also any kinds of changes that you see coming down the horizon. We talk a lot about, mental illness.
Correct. Yes.
And we talk a lot about the need for perhaps some different thinking in terms of how we staff the department. So how do you factor those things into an overall strategic plan and then bring that forwards to get it funded under the financial plan?
Again, you touched upon the mental health related calls. That is something that is a trend, and we've identified that trend in the past several years, and it's certainly not going to become a drop off anytime soon. I don't believe. So in terms of articulating how we justify our response, or how we have those responses to our calls, and then we do spend a lot of time on those calls, and that is something that our officers need to be trained on. So training comes into play. Having more specialty officers to handle those types of things comes into play. And then looking at an option to hiring an individual like a clinician to come on board to help our officers better treat those individuals that are in crisis. And yes, you're right, that does factor into a financial plan, because that does obviously have a cost to go with that. So we continually address trends. Again, substance abuse disorder is another trend that's going in the wrong direction. Unfortunately, it has been for some time. So, that's another area where we would need to have more training in our department, and to make more awareness as to how to handle those types of situations. And maybe even that clinician could be even put together to assist in our response to that as well. Because right now our own detectives do that outreach for people that may overdose or in substance use disorder. So that's a burden on I don't want to say a burden, because it's certainly a worthy task, but it's one more thing that we need to do outside of our normal scope.
Follow up. So the discussion so far has talked about, the department and how the department runs, which agreed that it is a very well-run department and we're doing a good job. But one of the things that I'd love to hear is some thoughts around innovation. And what are the new things that we need to do? What are the changes that we need to make? The things that we're doing today, even if they're going well, and they seem to be, those same things may not be applicable 2 years, 3 years, 5 years down the road. So again, sort of with that longer term view in mind and vision in mind, how do you think about innovation, and what types of innovations and changes would you think you'd be bringing into the department, whether that's people, process, tools, training, whatever it might be? What are your ideas around innovation?
It's incredibly important to not remain stagnant. And I know I had kind of said earlier that we're going in a good direction. I like to keep going in that direction. I hate to sound like I'm satisfied with being stagnant. In terms of being innovative, what's happening with police reform now is going to not force our hand, but we have to pivot and change how we do business based upon those regulations that have come down. And I'm not even remotely opposed to what's happening with reform. I think it's needed in our industry, and that's what I think we need to adapt accordingly to make sure that we are ahead of that going forward. And we've been very, very forward-thinking in how we've done business thus far. So again, in terms of bringing in new tools and equipment, obviously I'm a big proponent of ensuring that our officers are well engaged and giving them specialty tasks to do. So it will be to expand upon, again, some of the things that we're doing now, but also to find new things for them to do to stay engaged. I think that's going to be important for our retention as well.
So I think that's a super important question, and I was gonna ask it at some point too, because new ideas I think is important, because if you reach this point in your career where you become the police chief of a major community, and to some extent, you didn't build this department, it was built by by other chiefs before you.
That's correct,
and you were involved, of course, along the way. But you must have new ideas, you must have some specific things, and when I say new ideas, it doesn't mean you can't copy from another town. If another town's doing a really great thing, it doesn't have to be your original idea. You can take that and bring it here to Walpole. And so I'd like to get a sense of, like, are you or would you continue to look to other communities and what they're doing and what's working, what you don't want to do, what you do want to bring here?
So, yes, of course, and you bring up a great point, and that is I never wanted to take the credit for something that someone else has built, and you're 100% right. And I never wanted to portray that this was all my doing.
No, it wasn't my
So, no, I know that. I wanted to just address that, because it's something that I do, I'm working with every day, so. But I'm proud of where we're at. So, of course, we attend regular meetings, statewide meetings with other chiefs, and we collaborate with different ways to do things and do different, and we have various different programs that we use. I would like to bring forward a senior police academy, which we haven't. We had a citizens academy years ago. I'd love to bring a senior one forward to help that demographic feel like they're included in our community as well. So that's just one. I know it's not a major idea, but that's a small idea that I'd like to do going forward. And then some of it is relative to our hiring process. Right now, we utilize another organization to do our testing. I like to keep that internally, where we can have some control over how we hire our folks and what we do to bring them in terms of physical fitness and things of that nature. Because right now, we're kind of at the mercy of whether the academy physical fitness standards. So we like to bring to change how we do some of our hiring to better address that issue that we have been having. So things like that are things that I'm thinking of right now.
And I recall when you were before this board, maybe it was at our last meeting or the one before that, you talked about mental health and I think applying for a grant. So that was another idea that you're looking to
Correct,
try to
yes.
get funding for, or find a way to bring that to Walpole.
Correct, yes, and that's something that we're working on right now. Yes, we're.
Oh, non-lethal tools, I know that's a jump, but like, are you happy with the tools that your officers have? Are there other non-lethal tools that you could, pepper spray, I don't know if you use that?
So we do use OC spray, much less than we used to. When you spray OC spray, it gets all over everybody. So usually you take down a couple officers with you. So we don't use that as much as we used to. But we did develop, we moved into the use of our conducted energy weapons, and we're actually looking to move to a different technology, a same weapon but different technology that's a little more effective. So that's one thing we're looking into. There's other technology that is out there for less lethal weapons. One of them is a bowler wrap, which you can use to take someone into custody without having to really chase them. We've kind of hesitated on that because of where it fits into the use of force continuum. That's something other agencies are doing, but we're kind of veering away from that right now. And we also have less lethal sponge rounds that it's shot out of a shotgun-like device, but it's less lethal. And I think we've had some incidents, as I've mentioned to you, through various updates, where those less lethal weapons have been incredibly important. And I think that we need to continue to use them. And right now, I'm satisfied with what we have. Some of the new things that have come out, I'm still a little hesitant on.
Sure.
But I'm satisfied with what we have right now.
I think the point is that you're aware of the other options out there.
Oh, absolutely, yes, yeah, yeah.
Consider them, and you've chosen the ones that.
We chose the ones that have worked well for us right now. Thankfully, we haven't had to use them all the time, but there's been instances in other communities where when less lethal options aren't available, bad results happen. And we've been fortunate to avoid that because we've had those tools.
Good. Thank you.
Along the lines of sort of jumping off from that point, one of the questions that I have here is, you know, you mentioned that the department, if it doesn't change, it gets stagnant. The same applies to all of us in terms of our what we do professionally. What are your thoughts of professional development for yourself, and how you will learn about these ideas that are being used elsewhere, or new ideas that are coming, or different management techniques and the like?
It's
leadership skills?
incredibly important to always continue to learn. I'm halfway through my career, and I have a lot left to learn about a lot of different things, and to constantly be open to learning new things, and then whether it's through chiefs that have been around a lot longer than I have, or whether it's through formal training, I think it's incredibly important. I'd love to go to the FBI National Academy in Quantico. I think that is, from what I've heard from other people that have attended that, it's the pinnacle of all professional development for law enforcement. You can, and not only just from learning different things, but meeting people. You can have contacts from all over the world through that experience, and that's something that, as soon as they open that academy back up to more regular classes, I'm excited about the opportunity to be able to go to that.
Okay, great, thank you. I guess the only remaining question, we hit upon many of the police service delivery issues when we were with some of the questions, and the board may have a number of other questions, but the only one I have left that I just wanted to sort of touch upon is, once again, the issue of diversity, equity, and inclusion. Sort of from the standpoint of, there's been just so much focus and so much self-reflection that many people have gone through as a result of incidents over the past couple of years. What changes have you, for yourself, seen as a result of that self-reflection on those topics?
Well, certainly, like you said, we've all kind of taken a step back and had a long, hard look in the mirror. I think that our own implicit biases have come more to the forefront. I think that we're a little more aware of that than we used to be. Obviously, everybody has the biases, whether good, bad, or otherwise, but I think that if they're utilized in the wrong way, they affect people's decision-making, and that becomes problematic. It affects our trust and legitimacy. So I've certainly seen a lot more of that awareness, and I think that training in that area is extremely important. That's on the list of, we mentioned training earlier, that, you know, that's that non-tactical police stuff, but it's important things as a human being, you know, that we need to understand that we have these biases, and that we can not let them, you know, cloud our judgment and treat people differently for any reason.
Great, thank you. That's all I have for questions.
All right, so let's go around and see if people have any more questions. We do have some time left. Glenn, I'll start with you.
I'll pass right now. I mean, I asked some
Okay.
questions, and I'm okay at the moment.
Sure, Ben?
I'm good, thank you.
Nancy?
I'm good, thank you.
Jim?
Let me just take a peek at what I've got here. I think I may have asked mine as well.
Well, let me ask one while you're thinking about that. So, the whole topic of accreditation, sort of the back end of, you know, can you talk a little bit about where we stand with the accreditation? I know we're working toward it.
Yes.
And then accreditation is really a series of policies and procedures. How do we train people and evaluate people based on how they do? So sort of talk about that spectrum of
So-
officers.
Okay, yeah, so accreditation, again, is a very high level of, well, it's a high level of accreditation being taught by our department through the Mass Police Association, Accreditation Commission, I'm sorry. So right now, where we are at, we have amended all of our policies and procedures in accordance with the standards from the commission. So we're good there. And we actually just recently evaluated those particular standards with the new ones that came out as a result of police reform and through the Post Commission. Those have been updated, and all of our officers have been trained on that right now. What's holding us up is some old drugs that are left in our property room. They need to be locked in a certain manner, separate from other evidence. And right now, we have a significant amount of evidence in the drug room that we are working to destroy. And as a result, we are working through that, and that is the last hurdle, to go through the mock assessment and then eventually through the final assessment to become an accredited police agency. So the important part of having our policies updated and train all the officers trained on those policies has been completed, and that was a huge hurdle for us. We're so fortunate to be in the building that we're in right now, because now we have the facility to make sure that we can make this happen. We just need to get rid of some drug cases from the late 90s that is taking a while to destroy, and once we do that, we are going to be, within the year, well on our way.
Okay, thanks. Jim?
Yeah, so the only thing that I didn't touch on was, we had a question in here about, how you would go about reducing resistance to your change initiatives. This goes back to the question of what things would you change, innovation, how would you change it? But importantly, how would you introduce that change, those changes? How would you go about it within the department, within the community, within all of the stakeholders that you'd have to be dealing with? How would you identify the stakeholders, and how would you then, manage the change through its life cycle?
So, of course, adapting our agency to better serve the community is really what we're all about. So we identify those particular stakeholders that may need some different attention, and then use those folks to set our agenda like we did before. So once we identified a need, we would, again, come back and explain that need to our officers. And I think it gets back to explaining why we're doing things to within our own agency is what allows change to happen. We can certainly, tell people they have to do things for a million different reasons, and if they don't understand why they're doing it, then they're not going to be very effective. So that would be the way we implement change internally. And again, through regular correspondence with the community to identify those particular stakeholders who may need a change in our service. Again, through transparency and accessibility and regular communication with them is how we identify that need, and then telling them how we're going to better serve them clearly and concisely, and ensure that that's what they need from us.
Thank you. That's it, Mark.
Sure. Anybody else? Okay, I think we're out of questions. Bernie, do you want to wrap it up?
I
or-
think, again, I want to thank you for, on behalf of the board, certainly, for being part of this long and arduous process that we've put together to make sure that Walpole gets the best possible chief.
I appreciate it. I'm grateful to be part of the process, quite frankly.
So I'll give you a few, if you want to just make any last comments, and then just to let you know that, the board will be making their decision, and I'll be in touch regarding the outcome of that.
Okay, outstanding. Just briefly, thank you all for having me here tonight. Again, being a member of this department for quite a long time, and having a vested interest in this town and this community is to be in this role as its leader on an interim basis has been an honor, and it means a tremendous amount to me to be in front of you here tonight with an opportunity to have that become a permanent job for me. This community and this department and these officers mean the world to me. My family's always number one, but this town and this department is a close second. So to be sitting here before you, to have an opportunity to continue this position on a permanent basis is an honor, and I thank you all for having me tonight and the opportunity to come before you.
Thanks,
Chief.
Appreciate you coming in.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Thank you. So, my initial comment is I think both candidates would make a great chief for the town of Walpole. I know I said I would ask if you wanted to vote tonight, but I'm not ready to vote, so I'm going to say that takes care of that. So my suggestion is we all think about it. And why don't we put this on the agenda for next week, I believe we're meeting. I do want to, I assume Bernie will do this, but, if anybody has additional questions they'd like either candidate to answer, I'd like to route them through Jim, through Bernie, and get them answered. So I always find that as I leave a meeting, as on my drive home, I think of more things, that, boy, I wished I had gone down this path. So I assume we're all in the same boat, and I just want to make sure you're all comfortable with waiting a week before we consider that, so.
Yeah, I definitely would want to do that. We heard a lot tonight. I need to, digest it, go back and read my notes and really be thoughtful about this decision. It's a big decision. It's something that I feel that I want to spend more time on.
Great.
Good.
Okay. I'd entertain a motion, well, Bernie's just walked in the room. Bernie, so what we've decided is we're not ready to vote tonight. We all want more time to think about it.
Okay.
And I just wanted to make sure that if we have questions for either candidate, can we route them through Jim to you to get additional information, or go down whatever path we were thinking of?
Absolutely, and you can route them through Jim, and if members have questions that they'd like to send on, just direct to me.
Okay.
I'm happy to do that as well, whatever, Jim, how
Whatever,
you
we'll
work.
work it out.
Yeah, so,
Okay, that'd be great.
all right.
So we were just about to adjourn, so do I hear a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
So, second.
Second, motion is second, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Thanks, everybody.